Welcome to Comparative World Religions, Chapter 1, in the Experiencing the World Religions by Michael Malloy. I'm Doug Beatty. I'm going to share with you the first chapter about understanding religions. So we're going to take a look at what this is all about. This is the book we're taking a look from. I think we've covered that in the intro. And this is a picture that gives you kind of a view of maybe spirituality or the church. But here's what religion is about. We need to take a breakdown. It's a Latin word made up of two separate words. Re, which is again, you're redoing it, reliving it. And religion, or lig, is what? Lig is a connection. It's a joining, rejoining. The idea is rejoining with God is the idea of religion. But that's the Latin background of religion. What is your definition is the question. What is your definition of religion? Do you have one? Have you ever thought about how to define it? Well, maybe we'll help you in this particular class to see what religion is. And, well, how do we recognize it? What makes a group religious? How do you become a church, some may ask? Are you actively seeking or responding to a higher authority? Are you looking for transformation through a response of your perceived ultimacy or a belief in and a worship of a supreme being? I think that's usually what people are looking at for religion. But we're going to explore some concepts, some similarities, and some ideas about how people go through this process of studying religion. Lawrence Cunningham and John Kelsey have a really long definition of what religion is. It signifies the ways of viewing the world that refer to a notion of sacred reality made manifest in the human experience in such a way as to produce long-lasting ways of thinking, feeling, and acting with respect to the problems of ordering and understanding existence. Now that is a mouthful, but we're not going to memorize that. But as you can see from this, how people see religion differently. And I think maybe religion is just human activity seeking out the sacred or the ultimacy, the bigger thing that teaches us to think eternally, spiritually, and differently about our existence. We're going to approach it from a phenomenological perspective. That is, we're going to look at Christianity from a Christian perspective and Islam from an Islamic perspective, I hope. This phenomenological idea is to grasp a religion from its own perspective, from its own level. Now, I'm normally doing this in class, and I invite guests to share with the class what their Islamic experience is like, or what it is to be a Hindu, or what it is to be a Taoist, say from Japan or Taiwan. We need to have a sympathetic and objective look at the other religions. So we have to listen, watch, and kind of understand, take in what they're doing and how they believe. So there are some similarities. There's at least 8. We're going to look at several here. And we need to understand what they are. Some of it is about myth. Just this is a side note. But myth is not untruth. Myth has been used in the religious sense as a way of telling a story. It can be understood through maybe a parable or a legend or just a true story. But They often use the word myth to convey that, and it confuses people, so I just wanted to let you know that myth isn't necessarily untrue, at least in religious studies. So one of the 8 elements is ritual. We're looking at beliefs that people are practicing through ceremony. It's made real. And they have certain ethical ideas, a discussion of codes, what's right and wrong, and from their sense of the sacred reality and sometimes just a sense from their society. And then there's a belief system. There's a system of studies, of maybe rules and regulations that people have for their religion. But there's also some questions that come with that, and it's their perspective of the world. Where do they come from? Where are they going? What's their viewpoint on questions, big ones like who are we and how's this all connected? Different religions ask them in different ways and answer them in different ways. There's also some material expressions through objects, through maybe incense or smoke, that they do in different kinds of churches or different kind of things. Incense is burned in temples and Taoist and Islamic sometimes, Hindu temples, Jain temples. Music is often a thing. It's different in each one, why they do it and what's being said or chanted. And they may or may not have statues, but there are material expressions in some religions. There's also emotional experiences, experiencing some sort of bliss, an out-of-the-body thing, experiencing peace or awe or maybe dread and guilt for what they've done. These are experiences throughout religions. There's a sense of the sacred that is compared to the ordinary. What is sacred? Something that's high and lifted up, something that's not ordinary, something that's not casual. But sacred is something that is usually considered supreme, possibly. And there may be sacred type of clothes, a sacred place, a certain sacred time, or certain people, or a certain kind of sacred language, kind of that, just those in the know. But there's a sense of sacredness to religions. And then there's a community, and I'd like to point out that there are different kinds of ways to understand these. In the community of Christianity, we call it the church. But there is places for worship. We also call it the church in Christianity. But in Islam, it's called a mosque. In Sikhism, it's called a Gurdwara. There's a temple for Buddhists. There's a temple for Jains. And there are other places, too, for worship. But generally, they call the group that worship together either Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu, Jains, Sikhs, and so on. The Christian group, they are originally called the church. It's unique. It's different. But the community, the idea of having a community in the different religions, we'll see those. And then there are the central myths, as I mentioned earlier, that myth isn't necessarily an untrue story, but it is a story about their past and giving a little bit of history and understanding to what they're talking about. Maybe about the creation, a flood, or their savior, and whatever they may be. But they call them myths, and it doesn't necessarily, again, mean untrue. There are sacred places. You see in this picture here that the sacred place here is a burial ground, and this may be considered a burial ground, but it's certainly a sacred spot. Burial grounds for an Indian group usually is not mowed, and this is one way you could tell that this is an Indian burial ground. But there are different ways of seeing Indian burial grounds too. They often do things up in the trees and put their dead maybe in a boat and burn it and push it out into the lake or down the river. But the sacred space, and this is a kiva that I was down here. This is from Mesa Verde in Colorado. And the idea is that these are doorways to get to the other world, to maybe reach God or maybe their ancestors, to connect with them, to understand who they are. There are sacred events, such maybe as a birth, a funeral, weddings, baptism, different things that people might do to show their maturity. It's the maturation events. But sacred. What is sacred? It's elevated from the normal. So there are some words that are pretty important to help us understand what different religions, how they express the sacred. One of these words is called transcendent. And without having a visual here, but it's kind of like a high, it's beyond this world, unlimited, beyond our mind. I would put my hand and just kind of go over my head and go, nyom, goes right over the head sort of thing. That's transcendent. The idea it's separate from humanity. And then there's a word in contrast to this, and this is called immanent, the notion of the sacred that is here and possibly graspable. The immanent God, the immanent sacred reality can be involved with you. In fact, back to the Indians, we'll be looking at some of these throughout the study. But some of the Indians did like Indian rain dances because they thought that their God, their higher power, the great eagle, the sun in the sky, or whatever, they thought that this God of theirs would be willing to do something if they dance for him. And this is called immanent. They're just kind of right there somehow, and if they do the right thing, they'll please their God, and it will be appeased or maybe coerced into doing something for the people asking. Then there are some words that describe, besides the transcendent or immanent God, there is a pantheistic type of theology, or pantheism, which means there are gods everywhere. In a way, everything is a god. The floor is a god, the ceiling's a god, the earth's a god, the sun's a god. It's not polytheistic, and I'll make a distinction with that, but pantheistic is that everything is God. All is. Polytheistic, by contrast, is where there are many gods. There's the God of the sun. There is a God of the moon. There is a God of wisdom. Then there's a separate God of knowledge, and a separate, so on. That's called polytheistic, polytheism. And then we have atheism, where they don't believe in a God. Theism is they do believe in a God of some kind, whether it be polytheistic, pantheistic, but atheistic means no God. This is from a Greek word. Theo or theo is the Greek word for God, and when you put the letter alpha or a in front of a letter or a word in Greek, it turns it into a negative format. So instead of just God, there'd be no God. That's what this is. They don't believe in a God. And then there's agnosticism, which Gnosticism or Gnostic is knowledge. And then no knowledge is the agnostic. And then there's non-theism. And one that didn't show up here for whatever reason is monotheism, where there is just one God. That's what the Christians and Islam and Judaism believes in, monotheistic, and for that matter, so do Sikhs. There are a lot of symbolism in religion, and we have the symbolism here for a Taoist or Taoist. Then you have symbolism here for a Hindu. You have symbolism, here's Christian. Now sometimes there's more than one symbol for faith. Christian is in the cross, this fish. Then this is one we're not going to study, but the Baha'i faith. And then here you have the Star of David and the candlestick, the menorah. Those are for Judaism. And then there are many other symbols here as well. So we'll look at those throughout the year, and you'll just need to pay attention to what they are. Where did religion come from? That's a question a lot of people have, and why a lot of people study religions in a distant, kind of at arm's length. They don't want to really be involved in religion, but they want to study it. And they ask this question: where or when did it start? For what it's worth department, all known studies of ancient histories and paleontologists have recognized that these groups of early societies all have shown signs of some sort of worship and the idea of the sacred, an idea of a holy something in their group. And some will say that they came from the same place, that all of these came from an original source. Some will say that they all lead to the same place. Everyone, if it all leads to heaven or something like that. And I think what we'll find is that in this class that is not the case. They are very different and they don't lead to the same place. But we'll find out, won't we, as we study. Where did religions come from? Where do they take us? And what's going on in them? Those are some questions. You may have some of your own questions. There are some patterns that we look for in contrast, for similarities or differences in this picture. These are different religions here, and they're all in gold. And the point of this picture is to show that the golden rule has been formulated in all the religions, and certainly not least of all in Christianity. For what it's worth, it was in Judaism 150 years before Jesus came on the scene, and it's in the Talmud, and but it was in a negative form, and it's in Confucianism and other religions as well. But so there are some similarities there, even though they are not said the same way. They're usually given in a negative form. But Jesus came on the scene and said, if you do unto others as you would have them do to you. And that's the golden rule that we are normally aware of. But it's not only in Christianity, just to let you know. There are some dissimilarities. There are some dissimilarities, but we're going to look at some similarities here. Some of the first patterns the different religions have. And the first pattern we're going to look at is the views that the world has and of life and other things. The views that a religion may have of the world and of life or other things. It's a worldview. That's the kind of popular term. It's a perspective filter is the way I like to look at it, because you filter things through your personal thought processes, and you have a philosophy of life. You have a worldview. Whether you know how to express it or not is another thing, but you do have a worldview. And different religions have different views on the things that we're going to look at. So one of the things that are different for different religions is the view on nature and the universe. Sometimes they put them together, sometimes they separate them. Taoism looks at nature in one way. Shinto looks at it very similarly, yet very differently. And Christianity may look at nature, or Judaism may look at nature in one way, and Islam may look at it differently. The deal is that dualism is a real thing. That is that, and this is for the quiz, and you'll see this on the quiz, that dualism is where there are equal and opposite powers in play. One isn't stronger than the other. Good and evil are equal but opposite in dualism. Okay, there's not good isn't better. Oh yeah, we like to see Star Wars and have the good win, but in true dualism, it isn't better. It isn't stronger. It isn't bigger. They're equal and opposite parts of the universe. But there's another form of dualism out there, and one it's separating the mind and matter, separating thoughts with from this physical world. So there's different ways of looking at dualism, and we're not going to get deep into it, but you need to understand that there are a couple different ways to approach dualism. In the religious studies, they're looking at nature versus the spirit, and that could be the sacred versus the secular, depending on how you look at it. Then there's the view of time. There's a time of eternity. Time does different things, maybe, in a religion. In Hinduism, time, since they believe in reincarnation, time is kind of unfolded slowly. This isn't the only life you live, so you die and you go into something else. Depending on how well you behaved in this world, then you'll go to the next, either on a higher plane or a lower plane, a higher caste or a lower caste, and their view of time would be different. Most of us in America think of time as just linear. Okay, it gets me, so many minutes to get through this video, and when can I get done? We're just looking at, okay, what's the next thing? We're not thinking of eternal time, really. But religious ideas, religious groups will talk about time in different ways. And the reoccurrence of time is really the idea of reincarnation. And the big question about religions that they all have is, why are we here? What's going on? What is it with stuff? And Buddhism has their answers. Christianity has their answers. Islam has their answers. So on. They all have different answers, and we're going to look at the way they're seeing these and viewing the world and how they answer this question. Why are we here anyway? Well, for what it's worth, department, in Christianity, we are here to maintain the earth. We are the creation, the top of all creation, to be the maintenance people of God's creation. In Islam, and okay, there's furthermore to that. Besides just the maintenance people, we are also in Christianity here to have fellowship with our Creator. He's a fellowshipping God and wants us to be a part of His eternity. Now in Islam, by contrast, is a monadic God, a singular one-cell individual sort of thing, and didn't have fellowship until he had creation. And Allah then created the world and demands that the world serve Him. You live in servitude under Allah. And in Christianity, you live in fellowship and break fellowship through sin. But anyway, that's why are we here. That gives you two little bits of understanding. In Hinduism, the idea of why we're here, it's to get better and to hopefully finally reach that moksha point. You want to reach the big end and get blown away by the end of all things. That is, you want to become one with the universe, the Brahma. But there's another view, a view about the text and the sacred message. So I have you, what is your textual orientation? So we have a picture here of the Torah. It's a representation through the Ten Commandment idea to the upper right. Then in the lower middle, we have a Quran written in Arabic, front cover, and then in the lower left, you have the Ari Granth Sahib. It's part of Sikhism, and then they have their decorated box for it to sit under, and they have it open there for a person to sit and read right here. It's here, or it's set up in here, and then they bring it down to sit and read it. And then in the English Christian thing, then you have different versions or translations, I should really say, of a text that was written, the New Testament, and they translate it to help people understand what that original text said in a different language. But what's your textual orientation? These are some similarities that all religions have, except for Shinto. Shinto has the Kojiki and the Nihongi, but they don't really, they're not really texts of sacred orientation. Just shows the background of Japan. How are things included or excluded? Do you share in the sacred? To be a part of the sacred, maybe you have to abstain from food or refrain from certain activities. Or maybe you have to participate in certain activities. Maybe you have to do certain things. That's the question that each of their religious groups will be showing you what's expected. But that's a big question. And in this one, there are several pictures here. There are 6 pictures, and it's a second area of pattern. It's not about worldview now, but it's about beliefs and practices. That's what the BNP stand for. At the right, I'm at an Indian dance, and some of the practice is to dance with certain regalia on. In the upper center, you have some priests doing for the Orthodox Church, getting their smoke out of the bowls where they have incense. Incense. You have to do the genuflect and do your cross thing with the way your hands are done in a certain way. That's what that picture is here. And then down here you have a naked guy kissing the feet of the Tirtha now I don't remember. I put myself on the spot because I didn't write it down. Tirthankara of the 23rd Tirthankara of Jainism. And this is the Mahavira. And they pour all sorts of liquid libations on it. And from way up high, the statue is about 80 feet tall. And one of the sects of Jainism is total nudity. At any rate, going into the Muslim open mosque in Saudi Arabia, it's in Mecca. This is the Kaaba, and this is their open mosque, and they're walking around it 7 times to do what they would have during the time of their Hajj. So they have different practices. So there are a lot of different patterns. Some are similar, and some beliefs and practices they have may be very different, but they're also asking about, what is God like? And they're trying to define him and trying to illustrate him through different activities, maybe baptism and communion. Islam, they're doing their belief, the 5 pillars. So that's what the belief, alms, prayers, fasting, and Hajj is, the 5 pillars of Islam. So there's a similar in the Christianity. They do certain sacraments. In Islam, they do certain things, and in Jainism and Shinto, and in Confucianism, they may wash, bow, clap. In Buddhism, do certain things. So there's patterns each one follow, even though they're different. Then they have prophets. They don't always call them prophets. So we have on the left here some gurus of Sikhism. You have maybe a prophet of Elijah, or maybe this is Jesus talking to the group. I don't even know. Or maybe you have a Buddha, and notice his hand here. And sometimes in these pictures of Buddha, you'll see a swastika on the forehead or on one of the dress areas. Then there are mystical orientations of different religions. You'll have the Kabbalah, you have the swirling dervishes to the left, and then you also have a mandala from Tantric Buddhism. Then the third pattern that you might change the way you view religions is through how male or female people interact. For the most part, religions around the world and historically are male dominated as far as leadership. The female are the followers, but we have a lot of ancient cultures. So we have Astarte here, Astarte, an Egyptian god. We have here maybe Venus or Aphrodite. This is out of Paris. From one of the Greek mythological studies. This is Freya from the Norse gods, and then you have Asherah from a god of the Canaanites. They're very old, back in the 800 to 1500 BC, 2000 BC. But it's not about the gods that we worship, about being female or male, but it's also about how people participate, how women and men participate in the different religious orientations. Here's the question then: what is religion? And what are some of the different approaches to religion? Well, we can approach religion from various different ways. So we can take a look at religion from a theological perspective, or we can just let's look at all the religions just through art, anthropology, archaeology, philosophy, mythology, psychology, and so on. How are we going to look at these? Well, I mentioned earlier this phenomenological viewpoint. We want to take a look at these from the different phenomena that the religions have, the activities, their texts, and their history. So we're going to approach it from several different ways and hopefully get a good understanding of the different religions, and understanding that too, just the term religion, while we might have a Latin background for it, how do you describe a religion to somebody? How do you determine whether that particular activity is a religious one? We actually tell people, oh, he's pretty religious at that, when we may be talking about him running every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. Or he's really religious about that, and he's reading the newspaper. Or he's really religious about that because he goes and gives time to the homeless shelter or something. We say that people are really religious about that. He practices his sport every day at 3 o'clock for 2 hours. Your coach would love that, wouldn't he? But at any rate, we approach religion in different ways, and we talk about it in different ways, so it's really hard to put a handle on it. So we have to kind of stand back and recognize the best way to know about a religion is get involved with that religious group and ask them questions and look at what they're doing. So what we're going to do in this class, besides some videos that I'll put forth, I'm going to have you get involved with religious people from that group so that you can hear from their mouths what their particular religious perspective is. Can you identify the difference between a religion and a philosophy? Well, maybe you don't know what a philosophy is, but it's a love for wisdom is what technically means. But a philosophy is the idea of searching out and understanding. We're trying to get to the base understanding of what religion is. And religion is more than just a philosophy, it's an activity with a sacred reality, is the way I would put it. But other people might have different ways of saying it, and it doesn't really matter. The question is still, can you identify the difference between a religion and just a philosophy? The reason I ask this question is some people will say that Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism specifically are not religions at all. They're just a way of life. They're just a philosophy of life based on certain ideas and understandings. And we may see that as we get to it. You can make your choice whether you want to call it a religion or not, but in about every textbook I have, they include Buddhism, Taoism, and others that other people might say no. How long has the field of religious studies been in an academic discipline? Well, it's around 200 years. This is on your quiz is the reason I asked this. I want you to understand that these things will be a part of your information. And gleaning that for your quizzes is important. You'll need to read through the text, need to read through the chapters, and I think this would all prepare you for your quizzes. The field of religious studies is given the attributed to Emile Durkheim, and in the late 1800s, early 20th century, he lived and really showed how to study it. But other people were doing it before him. But really, he has done some groundwork that other people maybe not recognize him as doing. But he brought a lot of things together. And it's like I said, the last 200 years, we're studying now religions from a perspective of a book that 200 years ago, the time of George Washington, there wasn't a book around that would talk about the religious studies of Hinduism. They just didn't exist, but they do now. Okay, the last few things here is on page 22 through 24. It talks about several people who studied from different perspectives of religion, and you'll need to see those. It's on the worksheet that is part of your assignment list. The question is, and this is also on the quiz and maybe on the assignment list, is why did you take the course? I think there are 8 different reasons that the guy Malloy puts in the book. You can choose from one of those or make up your own when you answer that question. But the question is, why did you take this course? And I do hope you find what you're looking for. And I think all of you are looking for a good grade, right? So the best way to do that is to listen up on these videos that I give, read, and do your homework. You can't miss it by that. All right, see you next time. Thank you very much.